global citizen. He's a best-selling author. He's founder and managing partner of Future Map, a data and scenario-based strategy advisory firm. His newest book is Move, The Forces Uprooting Us. It's in 2021, which was preceded by The Future is Asian, Commerce, Conflict and Culture in the 21st Century in 2019. He is the author of a trilogy of books on the future of the world order, beginning with the Second World Empires and Influencers in the new global order, followed by How to Run the World, charting a course to the next renaissance, and concluding with Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization. He's also the author of Technocracy in America, Rise of the Infostate 2017, co-author of Hybrid Reality, Thriving in the Emerging Human Technology Civilization 2012. Parag was named one of Esquire's 75 most influential people of the 21st century and features in Wired magazine's Smart List. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and bachelor's and master's degree from School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He has traveled to over 150 countries and is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. We are really fortunate and happy to have Parag here. Parag usually talks about a lot of stuff about a lot of countries, a lot of regions, and it is in our interest, we thought, to sort of provoke him and involve him in starting to think about India and write about India and bring India in his within his windscreen, so to say, so that even when he's not with us on occasions like this, he continues to sort of involve India in his global order thinking. Parag has already been with us on one earlier similar conclave, but I thought that in the current moment, after the last 2 years of pandemic and his very thought-provoking book, Move, I felt it is extremely important for us in India to understand what is in store, how things are going to unfold. And since we are talking about India at 75, shaping India at 100, which is the next 25 years, I'm taking the liberty to even gaze a little more into the future, because Parag's scenario is 2020, 2070, 50 years, and it's mainly in the area of climate change. He basically talks about how climate change is going to affect the various geographies of the world, and with that, how human populations, ethnic groups, nations, what have you, will start moving and churning, and over the next 5 decades, what can we expect the world to look like? Within that, we have almost 1/6 of the world's population living in a very small geographic area called India, with boundaries of mountains and the sea, which makes us feel very secure and safe in our enclave. But, is it as safe as it looks? That's what I want to basically start discussing with Parag. Parag, without getting into, any further, maybe anyway you can sort of have your own, way to lace in whatever you have, besides what I ask you. I'm going to basically start off with one question to you, Parag. You say in your latest book, with every 1 degree increase in temperature, 1 billion people will be uprooted. India will bear the brunt of the climate catastrophe like no other major nation, purely because of the population, and also the fact that India, in his estimate, in his wherever he's quoted it out of, shows India to be in one of the very badly hit climate zones of the future. And we have so much of population. And India is landlocked in the north with impenetrable terrain. Historically, it has limited Indians to literally not able to go and search for better pastures, greener pastures. So aren't we staring at being locked up in an inhospitable compound? While you make a case that the future is brown, how really can 1 billion Indians aspire to live in conducive climate niches of the future? More so when the average Indian youth is much poorer than the global average on almost all respects. Over to you.
Thank you so much, MK. Greetings, everyone from Singapore. Wish that I could have been with you today, but I'm delighted to join in this conversation, and congratulations on this occasion and looking forward to the next 25 years. It's very much the topic that I would like to contribute to in this discussion. And indeed, we cannot have conversations today about the future of the world economy, about the future of governance, about the future of geopolitics, without taking climate change into account. I could have continued to write books about geopolitics and globalization, completely agnostic to climate effects. But as you know very well, climate change is laying bare our false hopes and false predictions about the trajectory for our economies and for many other areas where we have tried to be more confident because of its dramatic acceleration. Now, this is an appropriate time to be having this conversation also because of COP26. A lot of promises were made at the COP26 summit. And immediately after they were made, two things were pointed out. Number one, they are very far in the future, while people are already suffering today. And second of all, many countries are actually still lying, quite frankly, about their carbon accounting, so to speak. Just how much are they really reducing emissions? And the numbers that matter when you have a COP26 summit are financial commitments and technologies that are being deployed. But the only number that matters at the end of the day is the atmospheric concentration of carbon emissions. And that number is getting from bad to worse. And if we look at, indeed, the geographies where humankind has very comfortably settled, it has been between 20 and 30 degrees north latitude. Or you can even go down to the equator and 10 degrees. But basically between 0 and 30 degrees latitude is where the vast majority of the human population is concentrated. But if you look at this map, for example, this map is showing you what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this is their forecast for what happens to the shifting suitability for human habitation of the world as temperatures rise. Places in red become less suitable, places in green become more suitable. Now, before talking about India, let me make a statement about what a profoundly ironic, violently ironic picture this presents. As you may know, MK, the world population is reaching a plateau. You know, India's population is large, China's population is large, but in North America, in Europe, in Russia, in Japan, populations are already shrinking. We have effectively reached the peak humanity, as I call it. The largest number of people that will ever live, ever, are basically alive today. And look at the places that are green, the places that are becoming more livable and more habitable over time, where it's even getting better due to climate change, have fewer and fewer and fewer people. And the places that are turning red, like India, like the Gulf countries, like much of Africa, like much of South America, have the most people. MK, there is not a greater irony on the planet Earth today, not even the profound and grotesque inequality of the world's economy. There is nothing as perverse as this fact. And this will hit home. This will hit home every single day for the rest of our lives, everyone in this room, everyone watching. Every day, people in the world are suffering from the effects of this fact. So now let's talk about India, because we have a very particular, peculiar geography as the subcontinent, surrounded by water, hemmed in by the Himalayas, one of the few remaining populations that is still growing, a very young demographic, one of the youngest countries in the world, and yet look at the color that is emerging here, due to, of course, some places stricken by drought, falling water tables. We know some cities have had the 0-day events, such as Chennai, where the groundwater has run out, where the water supply has run out, flooding in parts of the country as well, and so forth. So there is no more important investment that a country can be making for the sake of its own human capital, its own demographic health, than in environmental sustainability. And the answer is not going to come from COP26. The solution is not going to come from Joe Biden, right? The solution is not going to come from Xi Jinping. right? India has to have its own solutions. Every region of the world is a microclimate. Of course, you cannot control what China will do in terms of coal power plants, right? You cannot control OPEC oil production. All you can do is to try to shore up and reinforce your microclimate as India. What can we do in India to desalinate more water, to have more efficient irrigation, to use much more solar power, to have more drought-resistant seeds? On and on and on. The list of possible interventions, technological, social, environmental, to help to prolong the pathway to this fate. We can do those things. India is doing those things. But can you do it fast enough? And the answer is no. You could never invest what it will take, meaning you should be motivated to do more, and more. This is it. This is priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Thanks, Parag. Okay, so that brings me to the second question. Now let us assume a situation. I mean, let's just fast forward in the next 20 years or 30 years. By 2047, India at 100. The climate is worse than what it is right now. And you people in Delhi, I'm from Bombay, and last 2 days I'm finding it difficult in the evening to sort of breathe properly. Now, in 20 years or 25 years, you're going to have things getting even worse. You're going to have water running out in certain cities in the peninsula. Common occurrence every year on the western coast. Himalayas and the glaciers are almost waiting there to sort of start behaving differently from what it is. At that time, in his book, he talks about mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies. Mitigation strategies is about how to reduce these changes that are happening. What are the behavioral changes that we need to do to ensure that climate change is slowed down or reduced or stopped. Adaptation is what is most likely, because this mitigation is not really going to take everybody together, because everybody's motivation is not the same. If you see his map that he showed there, most of the people who are decision makers in the world today at the global order are already living in places which are going to not be under any great, in fact, large parts of Siberia and Canada are going to become more livable and more habitable than what they are currently. So therefore, I think adaptation strategy is what is going to be the order of the day. In that, I have two questions to ask him. One is about, for all those people who can get out of here, obviously, there are the grades of people who can and cannot. India, even now, is a net exporter of people over the last 100, 150 years. Our population and geography demands us to work towards more conducive arrangements for Indians to travel and working abroad. I mean, right now, Parag himself is not able to come to India to attend this, because if he has to come here and go back, he has to be in quarantine for 2 weeks in Singapore. Now, travel arrangements between India and many other places is probably the worst. We are amongst the lowest order passport in the world. So what would you suggest, Parag, should be India's approach to the formation and development of a global migration policy? Is there a global migration policy that is being thought of or even discussed? Or should we start discussing it?
Great question, MK. So here's the bad news. There has never been, and there will never be, a global migration accord. I promise you that the governments of the world will actually agree on a common approach to colonizing the moon and colonizing Mars. And even after that, MK, there will still not be a global migration accord for Earth, because international diplomacy, intergovernmental organizations are premised on national sovereignty. And the one vestige left of sovereignty for all countries, rich, poor, north, south, is the control or the flow of people across their borders. We can no longer control pollution. We can no longer control cyber hacks. We can no longer control viruses coming across our borders. But every last country in the world seeks to control the movement of people. And so we will never have a migration accord. Now, the question then becomes, what about Indians, right? Now, we're a large population. India needs to be thought of in a segmented way. There are those global Indians, and India's diaspora is the second largest in the world, behind China's. I do predict that the skilled and unskilled, semi-skilled labor of India will have growing opportunities to spread around the world. The rich world has acute labor shortages, shortages of doctors, shortages of IT professionals, shortages of farmers even. Russia would like to import Indian farmers. Kazakhstan is importing Indian construction workers. Europe, especially Germany, is importing Indian IT workers. 96,000 Indians moved to Canada in the year 2019. So skilled and semi-skilled Indians you're finding everywhere, and I do predict the Indian diaspora will absolutely be the largest in the world, no question, within the time of India 100. There's no question whatsoever, because China is aging, its population is shrinking, there is suspicion of China everywhere, Chinese are even going home. Meanwhile, India is young, India's population will be larger, Indians are welcome everywhere, Indians can learn English and assimilate, Indians have studied IT and nursing and medicine. Exactly the things that countries desperately need, Indians provide. So the mismatch and the correction of that mismatch will amount, MK, to easily tens of millions of people. So hopefully that means talented and some semi-skilled Indians will go abroad, will hopefully share their remittances in a two-way street and continue to contribute to India even as they were abroad. India is in that sense one of the few countries that can actually spare labor. But, and one of the things I think you'll find it humorous, you know, in the book I talk about the reverse Mughal Empire. 500 years ago, it was the Mughals coming north to south. In the 21st century, it's Indians moving south to north. And every time I travel to a place like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, I always see so many more Indians. It's remarkable how they're just organically showing up there in the labor markets. But let's talk about the Indians in India and adaptation, right? Adaptation, the crucial thing. You mentioned the cyclones in Western India. Now, some countries are already building seawalls and sea barriers, but India would have to ask, where? Look at this enormous coastline, one of the longest coastlines of any country in the world. Where exactly should we be building? Which cities? So many, you know, major cities that need to be protected. Mumbai, Chennai, and others. That's tens of billions of dollars, MK, just to deploy a technology that may not work. It may not work. It's not working in Venice, I'll tell you that much, and they've spent billions of dollars. Or we can think proactively. Should we be relocating people? Should we be building cities more inland and at higher elevation? Should we be doing more sustainable housing, more rainwater collection, more wastewater treatment, right? More, again, resilient agriculture, all of these things. Should we be focusing on places or focusing on people? And smart countries know that the things, the infrastructure, that's a commodity, right? That can be done at ever lower cost in an ever more sustainable and even movable fashion. But people, we have to invest in people. Investing in people means helping to relocate people to climate resilient, climate stable geographies. There is infrastructure that I would invest in, of course, in a big picture way. And that is, of course, channeling Himalayan water. We will have more and more glacial melt. If you look at the major mountain systems, mountain ranges of the world, the Andes in South America, the Alps in Europe, the Himalaya, and so forth. Only right now do the Alpine countries, the rich Alpine countries, Germany, Italy, France, Switzerland, Austria, they are already committing the capital, the resources to the engineering projects that would store and divert and harness this water, channeling into aquifers so that the flooding doesn't destroy people's homes, it doesn't wipe out the cropland. So that's the kind of infrastructure we need. Very smart, water-oriented, circulating these resources and circulating people. That's ultimately what is going to be a source of resilience in these difficult climatological conditions that lie ahead.
Thanks. That actually covers my third point that I was going to say, because you said, in the book, you made a very compelling argument that humanity needs to start retooling and, retrofitting the world for its 4.5 billion youth. And I think about 1/4 of those youth are going to be here. And India does need to worry about the future a lot more than a lot of other countries have to, and also relook at its own geography, understand what to do with the Himalayas. Only one good thing that I saw from your map is the Northeast, which always looks like something that is, a little out of our general conversations, which now in the last 5 years, I think there has been more of integration of that. The Northeast looks like one of the parts which is going to be a climate-suitable and climate-suitable niche part of India, which is good news. We think that means that a lot of our future big cities could be around Guwahati and so on.
Well, let me just make one point about that, which is, if you take this map on faith, and of course, this is produced by science. There is no political agenda in this map. You do have to appreciate the shifting demographic balance of power around the world, because of course, if countries realize that they should absorb people at a time of this demographic deflation, they should be competing actively for youth, especially Asian youth, as you said. In fact, the future of the human species, MK, can be summed up in 2 words: Asian youth. Asia has the majority of young people in the world. In a world where there are very few children being born, most of the youth are Asian youth. Most of the children are Asian children. And a huge number of those children are Indian children. These are just demographic facts. These are not rhetorical statements. And so countries like Canada, like Germany, and eventually under a different evolved government, even Russia and other countries are saying, we actually would love to have more Indians here. And that's why we're seeing it happen. And then the geographies, therefore, that will flourish, it's so fascinating. And this is where things get, very strange. Right now, we are watching as Myanmar pushes the Rohingya out and pushes them back into Bangladesh. But in the future, if you look at this map, the highlands of Myanmar and the upper Mekong region are more livable over time. You will see Bangladeshis moving into Myanmar rather than Myanmar pushing people into Bangladesh. These are the kinds of reversals that we're going to be seeing in the years ahead as a result of climate change. Now, every country has to anticipate and prepare for these phenomena.
Thanks. So now I come to another theory that you talked a few years ago about continental drift. And that's an important trend. You've been talking about it, and the pandemic has actually, accentuated it. In fact, driven us, as a global economic system into becoming more and more local. So, America, the North American continent is one group there, which is getting more integrated in terms of trade. Then there is the European community already most of the times are sort of making and selling to themselves. And then you have the RCEP, which is formed in Asia. Now, is it a cause of concern that we're not part of any of these major economic groupings that are happening? Because eventually these economic groupings could be front runners of even what is this called, longitudinal migration groups or friendly groups. We are conspicuous by being absent. Now the counter to that is India is as large as one of these groups population-wise, and why don't you just produce for yourself and do your own thing? Make in India, Atmanirbhar, all that is exactly in the same direction. But not being part of a global grouping, how much of a disadvantage is that to us, Parag?
Well, there are regional groupings emerging. You'll notice that on a map like this, I don't have borders. Right. This is, the future is much more about regions. Let me show you this slide here. This is the global economy organized according to the purchasing power parity of countries and the regional clusters. So you see that North America remains, of course, an anchor of the world economy. European economies together are a very robust cluster. And then you see Asia, right? And Asia is the majority of the world population. It's also more than 50% of global GDP, again, in PPP terms. In US dollar terms, China is more than 4 times larger than India, but in PPP terms, it's just over 2 times larger. So it's interesting to hear, the Prime Minister Modi ji and others talking about India 5 trillion, but really it's actually India 10 trillion already, if you think about these things in PPP terms. Now that's important because, of course, if you become a more and more self-sufficient economy, then indeed this is the right way to be measuring your economic size. And a large part of the reason why we often measure economies in US dollar equivalent is because of the price we pay for energy imports in US dollars. But if India can become more self-sufficient, focus on its own energy supplies, whether it's gas or whether it's renewable power, then the share of the GDP, the share, the trade deficit and so forth that is accounted for by energy imports goes down, which is of course very good for the economy. It creates more fiscal room for maneuver and so forth. Now, given India's geography, let me go back to this. Given India's geography, it's okay to not belong to one regional group or another regional group in the sense that they are not rigid blocks. They are sponges. And the RCEP communique, when it was came out last year, was very clear that they understand that India has its reasons related to the desire for protection of software exports and intellectual property and so forth. India has its reasons for not joining RCEP and is more than welcome to join at any point. And I do think that gradually those adjustments will be made. But the future of India's trade does not necessarily hinge on whether it is a formal member of one body or another body, fortunately. Trade is trade. India needs to unlock those complementarities with Australia, with Japan, with Southeast Asia, with the Gulf countries, with Europe, with the United States. Think globally, right? After Brexit, the UK has been out on a mission to sign 100 new trade agreements. India can also have many different trade agreements and also push towards regional membership. So I think it's really about complementarity. It's about supply and demand. It's about attracting investment because, again, this regionalism is a geopolitical phenomenon. North America wants to be more self-sufficient. Europe wants to be more self-sufficient. Asian powers should want to be more self-sufficient. And the geopolitical point is that America and Europe want to help Southeast Asian countries and want to help India to be the new production hubs in order to draw those supply chains away from dependence on China. So this is a huge opportunity for India as a trusted rising power to present itself as the most logical destination for manufacturing, as a large market in its own right, as a place where IP will be protected, as a place where innovation is happening, and as a location from which to export to the high growth markets of Southeast Asia and the Gulf economies. That's the way I think India should be playing it.
Thanks, Parag. And that brings me to the last question before I open it to the hall out here. And this is something that you spoke about when we were discussing in preparation for this. And very interesting point that you talked about is the shared history of the southern nations, which is Africa, India, and the Southeast Asian Peninsula, the ASEAN Peninsula, which is all those Southeast Asian countries out there. All these countries, you said, have a shared colonial history. How does that, just as we have a English language benefit, you said something about this shared history could become a great advantage for us to build communities in the future, if you can explain that.
No question. These categories of North and South and, non-aligned and so forth have started to fade into the past. But I do believe that the notion of a common post-colonial psychology, a post-colonial fraternity, remains very, very strong. Not in the sense of the British Commonwealth, in which one defers to the United Kingdom to organize these things, but across the post-colonial world. And the best example of this is India's relations with Africa. Because if you recall, MK, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was all the rage to talk about how China is marching across Africa and colonizing the continent. The Economist magazine put that on its cover. They had a Chinese soldier on a horseback, saying that this is Africa's new colonialist. But here's what the British don't understand, and perhaps it's no surprise that they don't, that post-colonial countries have woken up. They've experienced being colonies. They've experienced being pawns in the Cold War. And many of our leaders alive today, many of our own relatives still alive today, remember being a colony. They remember the Cold War. They are not going to let China be the new colonizer. They are on hyper alert to China's mercantile, neo-mercantile practices, debt trap diplomacy, import substitution, all of these things. Even in Pakistan, which is heavily dependent on China, they howl when they see that China wants to sell them things based upon their own raw materials. No country can be fooled anymore, MK, which is why China is going through this learning curve. It took the British 300 years to go through the life cycle of commercially driven promotion of national interests, subjugation by the crown, direct rule, complete foreign administration, then gradually anti-colonial movements, liberation, and decolonization. 300 years. In China's case, MK, this is happening in 3 years. I see countries where China goes in and China makes friends, makes investments, buys allies, builds infrastructure, develops a very heavy trade surplus, indebts the country, their backlash and resentment brews, and then those countries say, we're fed up of you, China, get out. I see that happen in 3 years, not 300 years, because we have woken up. We are not, this is not the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, or the 20th century. And that's an asset for India, because India can go to any one of these countries, any one of them, just get on a plane and go and say, why are you taking China's loans at a 4% interest rate? We'll give it to you for 1%. Why are you having China build this infrastructure? It's going to fall apart in exactly 18 months. Let us do it. Why are you having China do your data systems, your 5G, your telecoms, and launch your satellites? They're stealing all your data. Let us do it. So there's an incredible opportunity for India to step up across the post-colonial world, which, let me just remind everyone, though you must know this and should, I'm talking about most of the world is the post-colonial world. Most of the planet is post-colonial countries. Most of the human species lives in post-colonial societies. This is India's time to flex its muscles in these places as a trusted partner where China could never be fully trusted.
Thanks, Parag. That's very, very insightful. I would open the floor to questions. Parag, if anybody has questions here, we have 10 minutes. Yeah. Somebody give a microphone, please. Yeah.
Namaskar, this is Birendra Chaudhary. Just I got attention as you have perceived the India's future in the global world. My question is that India has been reluctant alliance partner since 1947. First, India was not in a position to decide whether we should go for US or for USSR. We opted third thing, non-alignment. But non-alignment totally collapsed at the time of 1962 war. Though Nehru did not like US, but he called Kennedy, please help me now. And Kennedy happily helped. In 72, one war again, India won the war, but the major factor was USSR, because that was in India's side. directly or indirectly. My question is, during Cold War, again India was with, USSR. Several occasions in UN, USSR helped India, bailed out India on the question of Kashmir. But after the end of Cold War, sorry, question is a bit lengthy, so aap maaf karenge. So after the end of Cold War, the situation is flux. Samuel Huntington's theory came, North-South came, global village came, global world came. But at the point of India, what India should do now? Because my question is that, not happily, that India has not taken a decision alone. India always wants someone जो पीठ ठोके, पीठ के पीछे खड़े रहे हाथ लगा के, sometime in USSR, sometime in US. Why? So what is your perception, as you are saying this is the world for India, the future of India. So will India take all decision alone?
India has actually evolved considerably in terms of its strategic outlook if we think about just the last 20 years. I remember 20 years ago when I was actually working with the great, legend Stephen Cohen at the Brookings Institution. And we actually hosted Indian, Japanese, and Australian diplomats. And we talked about how shall we manage the rise of China and so forth. And India was very vocal in those conversations. And today, of course, what do we have? The Quad. United States, India, Australia, and Japan. Now, it took a couple of decades of dialogue and building trust and building coalitions to make this happen, but it's happened. 20 years ago, people felt that India could potentially be used as a counterbalance to China in the terrestrial geopolitics of Eurasia, as you see on this map. But India wisely decided that it would invest as much or more in its navy, right? Western powers didn't tell India, you are a natural naval power. But India is wise enough to know that in its history, it has a great maritime tradition and that it should invest significantly in its naval modernization. And that's what India has done. And as a result, the Indian Ocean is not only aptly named, but the Indian Ocean will remain multipolar. And the fact that the Indian Ocean will remain multipolar under Indian and Western cooperation in the maritime domain is one of the key reasons why China will not achieve some of its significant global objectives. And this is India's thinking, India's logic, India's efforts, India's investments. Right now, if we look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, which India, of course, has refused to join, and we look at the tensions in the Himalayas over China's road building activity, it's India that has stood up in the situation in Bhutan, the situation in Ladakh, and said, no, right? We will draw a line here, we will contest. And the rest of the world is looking at this and saying, it is possible to stand up to China. Look at how India has done it. So remember that I actually think that India is transitioning, transforming, gaining that confidence. And these episodes are very tangible examples of that. And what's next, of course, is, unabashedly tighter relations with the United States, with Japan, with Australia, still doing robust business with Russia, with Israel, and other powers. New strategic relationships with Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, and of course with Europe too. And this is what I call multi-alignment. This is the theory that I formulated in my first book. I said, what smart countries do is they do not align with one side or the other side. They multi-align. A confident power must multi-align. It must always seek the maximum benefit to itself from any relations in a 360-degree way. And that's what India is doing right now. And I think that's a very, very positive step.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, there was a question there. Can somebody get the microphone? Here in the center.
Parag, good afternoon. I am Rajan Varshne. Basically, I am engineering and MBA background. I wanted to understand why countries are not able to treat wastewater in a very decentralized manner. In centralized water treatment, what is happening is 80% of the expenses are happening in conveying the water to the centralized treatment plant and pumping and line laying and everything. And then after treating it or not adequately treating it, it is being merged in the fresh water or in rivers and not being reused for agriculture or local horticulture. If we do it in a decentralized manner, we save electricity also, because decentralized techniques like soil biotechnology, etc., are doing it at very little electricity or no electricity, and that water can be locally reused, say 100 KLD plant or maybe 1 MLD plant, 40 KLD plant for different societies, different townships, small towns, small villages.
This is a very specific question.
Yeah. So when such things are so simple and they can be used, implemented in a very low expense, why countries are going in for conventional methods for which UN is also against? Only some African countries, small countries are doing it. My view is what can be done to inculcate such techniques here in India and across the world. Thank you.
It's a great question. This is one of the areas where localism, environmental localism, should be paramount, because it's a cheaper solution than very large scale infrastructure that is, again, very costly, has to operate across large distances, and may not be sensitive to the changes in water supply given what's happening with rivers and reservoirs. So I fully endorse your solution, your suggestion, that we focus on the local, sort of wastewater treatment and recycling, and that it be separated into potable and agricultural uses. You're seeing rich countries do this in a localized way. Quite frankly, water resources have to be done in a localized way. So this is a kind of thing that not only should be done more in India and invested in more in India, but this is, again, thinking that India should be exporting to many other countries as well, because they certainly cannot afford to be doing things in the overpriced, heavy footprint Western way.
Okay, I'll take one last question, and I think I will take it from the event director. Mihir wanted to ask a question. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Parag, Mihir here. I have a question, if you look at India's neighborhood, it's not very pleasant in terms of democracy. So most of the major nations who are surrounding India are technically not pure democracy. For India to survive as a pure democracy for next 25, 30, 40, 50 years, do you think a change is required in the kind of democracy we have? Or let me put it this way, do you see India surviving as a democratic nation in its current form in next 3-4 decades?
I think that democracy is an integral part of the Indian political psychology, of course, in the independence era. And even though there are, legitimate reasons to be concerned about curtailments of certain democratic aspects of the Indian polity, I think that we should appreciate democracy as a cultural, social phenomenon, which even when the politics of democracy are tested, the society remains very loyal to those principles. So democratic culture is something that is deeply, deeply Indian today, and that's a very important source of resilience. So I don't have any doubt that India political psychology. What I worry about is the quality of governance, because we very often conflate democracy and governance. And it's the difference between inputs and outputs. And actually, Prime Minister Modi ji has been very correct to point out that he wants to achieve maximum governance. That a country can be. If you look at countries in terms of the share of their budget that is spent on infrastructure, on social welfare, and other kinds of public services, India's has historically been very low. So you can have full democracy and minimal governance, which is what you might say India was for the first 50 years of independence, or you can strive towards remaining a robust democracy, but focusing on increasing the capacity for governance. And this, to me, is the mission. This is the one thing every Indian must absolutely agree on, that you cannot have a functioning state if that state doesn't have that nationwide capacity to deliver public goods to the people. And that's an agenda that I support, no matter who is pursuing it. So again, I'm not doubtful about India's democratic nature, but to really meet the test, to be respected in the world today, it isn't necessarily about how democratic you are. It's about how well governed you are and how effectively governed you are. And that's an area where India is making improvements, but where the job is definitely not complete. It's a long way from being complete at the federal level, the state level, and even at the local level.
Thanks, Parag. I think our time's up. And it's been really, really wonderful chatting with you these last few days. And this 45 minutes have been really, really illuminating. I hope people go back with a different perspective about the next 5 to 10, 3 to 5 decades in the light of what you spoke today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.